I'm gonna be honest. I think I like Edward Norton as Bruce Banner than Mark Ruffalo.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite co-hosts, Avalon, to review one of the original Marvel Cinematic Universe films. That's right, we're talking about The Incredible Hulk, that 2008 American superhero film, which was written by Zach Penn and directed by Louis Leterrier. Yeah, anyways, that was who it was. I don't recall seeing Louis's name in future films, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but we'll get into that for sure today. Avalon, you want to give everyone your initial thoughts and rating of The Incredible Hulk?
You know what? This is gonna be the weirdest thing. I've never really done this with a movie before, especially when I haven't seen it in a long time. But the first
Uh-huh.
thing that stood out to me, oddly enough, this time around was the music, which is
Mm-hmm.
weird. I just was like, this movie had a really interesting soundtrack for what it was. And it's like, you
It's so
know
funny you
what?
mentioned that.
I just was like, what the heck? Like, I can't believe I've
Yeah.
forgotten this. This is actually a good soundtrack, all things considered. I was like a little surprised. Um,
Yeah.
Watching it this time, that was the first thing that stood out in my mind. Uh, the but other than that, I admittedly, I mean, I think time has not like this is definitely one of those movies. I don't think it was really popular at the time when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember loving this movie when first watched it either. But watching it
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm like, oh, okay, this wasn't actually that bad, all things considered. It just there are definitely problems, but it's not a bad movie in my book. With that being said, when I reviewed it, I got a 4.35, but some of those things I was willing to change my mind on depending on the
On how the
depending on certain
discussion.
factors. Yes.
Yeah.
I wasn't like
No,
a hard
100%.
fast on some of those points.
Yeah. Well, I found myself, ironically enough, in the same thought as you were for a lot of these things you just mentioned. The music was definitely something I looked at this time and went, "Wow, this is actually some pretty solid soundtrack music. I enjoyed listening to this. I'd actually just listen to this while I'm working on something and enjoy it thoroughly." So
Yeah.
I don't think that should be a reason to crap on this film for sure. In regards to the plot itself, I recall at several points thinking that this was just middle of the road, right?
Hmm.
Not amazing, but not bad. And I think that helped reflect the rating that I got because there was things that get incorporated into the overall viewpoint. So if you're at all interested or excited about the Incredible Hulk and want to see Edward Norton as the Incredible Hulk, this is the place to do it. Stop the podcast, listen to that. Otherwise, we're going to continue on. But yeah, my rating was a 3.75. So not too
Okay.
far off from where you're at, and
Hmm.
there's I think a very good reason for where it's at. But once again, there were several points where I went, hey, if Avalon has something to say here that I don't recall, I'll go with him on this one. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what we have to say. But let's get into it. Before we get into a full discussion of this film, Avalon, you want to give everyone a summary of what The Incredible Hulk is about?
So the Incredible Hulk is about Bruce Banner, a scientist who was involved in some kind of government medical program. He didn't realize it was a weapon program, but apparently it was. And he essentially affected himself with some gamma radiation, turning himself into a monster every so often. Uh, so he's on the run from the U.S. government throughout the movie, trying to find a cure for his monstrous condition, while also trying to keep the condition in check.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the
Yep.
basis of the whole plot.
Yep, pretty much. It's if anyone knows anything about the Incredible Hulk, he is the epitome of one of the original superheroes that people looked at, including Captain America, including Iron Man. And so
Mhm.
of those original characters, he was brought in very early. In that 2008 release, you have this one as well. So you had Iron Man then, you have this one here, and I think you had Captain America a year before, a year after, or something around there. So I forget exactly when the original Captain America was released, but it was around a similar
I
time frame.
I think in Phase One, the first Captain America movie was towards the end of Phase One, like before
Okay,
Avengers. Because you had the trailer for the first Avengers movie in the mid credits of Captain America.
got it.
So,
Okay, I mean,
um,
and you even get hints of that. Spoiler alert! In this film, at the very
hmm,
end, where you see Tony Stark walk up
yeah,
to Thaddeus Ross, so they definitely were planning that from the start. Regardless,
yeah.
now unfortunately, you don't get Edward Norton as the Incredible Hulk in that future release, but he got his appearance regardless in
Hmm.
this film. So that's the movie. We're going to get into the meat of it, as we always do, starting off now with that opening scene. You know, that opening scene where they have the montage of everything that has occurred to lead to Bruce Banner being the Incredible Hulk as he is. What were your thoughts on the opening scene and everything that led us to the current moment?
So I think there was a time and place in a lot of movies where they did this like montage kind of thing, where you had like you were kind of given the like they had the mid beginning credits rolling, but at the same time you had like information being dropped about the opening of the world, the beginning of the story. Because I recall there's several movies that did this, but I'm trying to remember which ones did this. But this kind of falls in the same category, where it's like a montage to kind of kick things off, and it does a fairly good job explaining a lot of what's going on and what happened. You kind of get glimpses without getting too much information. Like, okay, you kind of know something bad happened without fully seeing the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it ends abruptly with Bruce Banner like stopping the metronome, like because he's like meditating in some like place in Brazil, and like he just stops it suddenly, like almost like this was his thought process up at this moment, and he's like calming himself. So,
Right.
which of all the whole sequence, I did appreciate that final moment where like that being the thing that actually like starts the story more or less, gets us to the present. So,
Right. Almost like everything that you've just seen was his contemplations of what had occurred in the past, and then
yeah.
it was racing his heart rate too much, so he stops the metronome and
Hmm.
says, "All right, let's get back to reality here."
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I didn't love it either. I know that it
Hmm.
was one that usually openers, at least in big budget films, are pretty good at having those initial hooks that are pretty solid, right? And so it gets you
Yeah.
engaged in the film. This one was definitely on the lower end, in my opinion. It had that montage, which helps to provide all of the critical information for someone who's paying
Hmm.
attention, but it was also just pretty much bringing us up to speed to where we are
Yeah.
now in
Hmm.
a way that we could have the Incredible Hulk exist, right? We could have these other characters in the places they needed to be in the chessboard, if you will, of life that creates the background for this film. So it was fine. I didn't think that it was one of those super engaging openers. It was
Yeah.
more just there for the pure purpose of providing information, right? You got some of that similar to the latest Mission Impossible release. You got that in, I believe, the Ash film that we reviewed very briefly a couple months ago. So it's not like it still doesn't exist today, but it's definitely something that I don't love the element of it because it's a lot more of a tell don't show technique for the
Hmm.
pure purpose of bringing the audience up to speed.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'll argue in its defense is that this particular montage, while it gives you like basic backstory information, it doesn't like give you explicit details, which I appreciate. Like, it gives you just enough to give you an idea without showing you too much. Like, you see things from Banner's perspective in this montage, and you don't actually see the monster. Like you don't see the Hulk at all during this montage. You see his arms, but you don't actually see the creature itself, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't like you just get glimpses of what he's seen and remembers. You don't actually see all the damage he's done. You don't see everything. Like you get hits, and I appreciate that because it's like it doesn't fully tell you everything. It just gives you enough to get the like okay, give you an idea of what has happened. So
Yeah, and I will say, in regards to slow reveals, the slow reveal of the Hulk being itself was one of the stronger aspects of this film, where
yeah.
you didn't really see. It was approached more like a monster movie, if you will, for the
Hmm.
start of the film, where you get this idea this creature exists and it exists within Bruce Banner, and you don't know where it is or when it will come out. And then when he does actually come out, you see first the arms grabbing people, and then the shoe left there, and all that stuff. Some of it was a little corny, monster-esque things that you would see in any horror film, but it was a good way to try to build up this creature so that when he appears, he's fully manifested in the horror that he is, right? So definitely they did that from the start with this film, including in that opening scene. What are your thoughts on Bruce Banner, though, as a character? As you said, he grasps the metronome and says, "Hold on, stop that annoying racket." And then you get the introduction to him as a character, where he's
Hmm.
coming from. He's hiding out in Brazil, all of that stuff. What were your thoughts on Bruce Banner?
I'm gonna be honest. I think I like Edward Norton as Bruce Banner than Mark Ruffalo. Also, for what it's worth, the character is pretty well developed because we get an idea of a guy who struggles with inner demons, who's paranoid in a certain sense, and he's like always afraid in some ways. Like he wants to do the right thing, but he's
Uh
also
huh.
like scared of what could happen if things go wrong. So like you just see the fear in almost every scene he's in, where it's just like he's always on the run, always looking out. The only time he's ever really calm is around Betty, and that's
Mm-hmm.
like every other time outside of that, it's like he's kind of just paranoid individual, always looking over his shoulder, and so he's
Yeah.
definitely like so in some ways he's very relatable. He's like he's like you can understand why he's afraid, and you can see
Mm-hmm.
like so it's like kind of justified, but it's also kind of a flaw for him too. It's like he is afraid always.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that of all of the aspects of this film, the development of Bruce Banner in this is very good starting point, right? Where you have
Mm,
this person, he's being chased, right? He's on the run from one of the most powerful governments in the world, and then he also has secret technology that they're trying to get out of him. They're probably going to kill him and extract whatever they can out of him to learn the secrets of how he got to what he is. And then you also have the aspect that he has this monster inside of himself. He's trying to contain, trying to control, and he doesn't know how, but he's doing everything he can to not activate him, if you will, because he's afraid he's going to hurt the people that he loves and cares about if he does that. And
mm,
there's a lot of just really good aspects to, especially because, and this is probably my big issue with Hulk as a character generally, is that he's indestructible, right? You get the
mm.
Superman aspect of him where he can't basically he can't die. And you get mentions of that in later Avengers movies with the Mark Ruffalo iteration of this. But the idea that this guy is basically impervious makes it very difficult, I think, to build up tension around a character like that and be
Mm,
concerned for their life because you know they're going to survive no matter what. They're
mm,
invincible. And so they do a couple things with this to try to counter that. One being the internal struggle of
mm,
Edward Norton's character of the Hulk, right, or Bruce Banner, is he doesn't want this. He never wanted this. He's really trying to get rid of it if at all possible, and that's like the core element of who he is and what he's doing in this entire film. And then two, they do some other things with his destructibility slash indestructibility in this film. So whether or not you're a fan of that as a superhero person, we'll get to that in a bit. But I think that they do some things well with him as a character.
mm.
So
Yeah.
everything's against him, and he has a lot of motive to try to find a cure, which is pretty much his goal this entire film.
Hmm.
I don't know if you have more to say on any of that.
I mean, the only thing I'll say is this does kind of that does kind of tie into the points I gave for heightened tension, because I would agree that the worst problem with this movie is the tension. It is
Mm-hmm.
almost impossible to ratchet up the tension of the character who's indestructible, who like you can't really harm him, and he's like this brute monster in some ways. I mean, there's very little reason. Like, I guess you could have played it where it's like you also considered like the damage he causes, how he could hurt other people, but they didn't go
Mm-hmm.
that route. Where it's almost like he's just trying fighting the U.S. government, the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
The only times situations kind of gets worse is when people, essentially when Betty is threatened, and like
Right.
those kind of situations, uh, and when other people are potentially threatened. So those are the only times where it's like the tension kind of goes up. but not by
Yeah.
much.
Yeah,
But
no, and I'd agree. The only time he protects anyone, honestly, is when he's protecting Betty from the massive damage that's being thrown at her. And
mm,
Thaddeus Ross is losing his mind, right, as he's trying to stop the people from attacking them in the middle of it. But, there's everything
mm,
around Betty Ross is pretty much his only reason for trying to protect anyone or anything in this scenario. Other
yeah,
than that, he's just trying to get out of there. I guess he does protect the girl from the gang at the very beginning to show
yeah,
some level, and that shows some level of he cares for humanity, I suppose. But like
yeah,
as for the most part, not really an aspect of his character, at least in this film.
yeah.
It. What are your thoughts on Betty Ross? Since we're already talking about her tangentially, because she is a core motivation for who Bruce Banner is. Do you think that she's a compelling character as a side character, a good motivator for the plot and everything going on here?
I'm really curious what your thoughts are on Betty, only because I was having a hard time pinpointing where I felt about Betty. Because, I mean, she definitely plays more like an emotional character. I mean, she's this
Mm,
teacher for this school, I guess, and she's like, so I guess some kind of researcher slash teacher, I guess. I
mm-hmm.
research at this university. Um, she, I mean, she does care about Bruce Banner, clearly, and she's willing
Right.
to do whatever it takes to help him. And you also get the idea that she and her father, General Thaddeus Ross, have like bit of a bad relationship. So that does
Mm-hmm.
play a little bit into like her motivation, you could see. So it's not like her motivation was
Uh-huh.
unbelievable or anything. I just maybe thought maybe it was just her acting was a little odd to me in the movie. I just not sure where I find myself on her. I just
Yeah. I mean, it's true. Liv Tyler, she does decent as Arwen in Lord of the Rings, but also she does basically nothing in Lord of the Rings except for sits on a couch and says, "Oh no, you're gone. I miss you so much," and then marries the guy at the end. So I guess she does well for that. But
hmm,
I think, yeah, I don't think she's the strongest actress that I've seen playing a
hmm,
role. I think she had more development in this than most other films I've seen her in. But in regards to being an actually super compelling actor in the film, I don't know that she does it.
hmm,
She's fine. That was my
yeah,
main takeaway from her. Like, it's not like she's an
yeah, I guess.
incredible character. She's
Hmm,
got more reason, maybe, to be involved than, say, other characters that the MCU has brought in as female characters who also assist the lead. So if you talk about
yes,
Agent
hmm,
17, I believe her name was, who helps Captain America in Captain America Civil War, I think it is. We
yeah,
talked about that a couple months ago. She had basically next to no motivation because she barely knew Captain America, but all of a sudden she's got the goo goo eyes for him. So, I felt like at least she had a backstory and a reason to care for Edward Norton's Bruce
yeah.
Banner, but it was like it felt stock. She felt stock.
Well, I
It
think that,
was what it was.
yeah, I don't know if she was stock, like intentionally written to be stock, because we've read her character off. We looked at her character in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
She actually
Mm-hmm.
was a decent like character overall. They had all the bullet points of a good character. It's just I think maybe it was her acting. Like the more I think about it now, I just think the way she acted it out was what kind of
Mm-hmm.
undersold it. It didn't make it
Right.
completely believable. So, which would be on the actress's part. So,
Right, and maybe it's the actress that made the character feel stock. For sure, I
mhm.
could see that. And that's unfortunately one of the downfalls of cinematography and film is that if the actor's not good, then the overall presentation of that character falls flat. And
Mhm.
then it's not compelling if you don't believe it, right?
Yeah.
Cue Ms. Yabes from the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Oh my gosh, did not like her acting either. But we're gonna move on. All that to say is that her as a character is a core developing plot point for Bruce Banner. But
Mhm.
and it is only so believable for him if it's also believable that she is a compelling ally to the
Mhm.
protagonist. Anyways, let's talk about the villains because that's really what adds the conflict to a film, whether or not it's got compelling opposition to the hero at play.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on one, Thaddeus Ross, and two, Blonsky?
Okay. Um. Yeah, General Ross. He's interesting because you have the motivation with him definitely, where he's like his program technically succeeded, but the Bruce Banner escaped. So now he's like trying to retrieve the weapon more or less, but Bruce Banner's gotten good at hiding. So now he's like on a manhunt around the world, like gathering any information he can on some guy who's
Mm-hmm.
been infused with gamma radiation. And
Right,
so it's like you see how this is like this his obsession in some ways, or it's like I need to capture him, and it's just like he almost like hurts other people in the process several times, or it's like well he does hurt people, but especially his daughter,
mm-hmm.
where it's like there's several situations where his daughter almost dies because she was in the fire zone and he didn't like, but because he's so intent on getting the Hulk in that moment, he doesn't realize it until like almost he's almost killed, and it's just
Right,
like uh, so you definitely get this fuller like obsession with him, where it's almost like he's thrown his daughter to the wolves and almost doesn't care about her, though he actually does a little bit. It's this interesting dynamic where it's like he has completely gotten rid of her, but he's also like clearly he's pushed her to the side for this objective for Bruce
right.
Banner. So so I think he was an interest. I think he was the more interesting antagonist in this movie per se. I felt like Blonsky uh he was interesting. He wasn't. He's also becomes obsessed with the Hulk, though in a different way, where it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like he's
Mm-hmm.
after the. I guess he's a just a guy who likes to fight and he wants to actually beat the Hulk for some reason. Which
Right.
I found a little unbelievable. I guess on a certain level, it's like you go toe to toe with a monster like that. Is your first thought really like, I want to beat this guy, like kind of thing? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
that pulled me out a little bit from the movie. So I mean, I guess you
Yeah.
could explain it because he's a little bit of a psycho, but it's I don't know. There was a part of me that wondered at what point wouldn't other people like were people who were authority have pulled him off the project or off the hunt at some point if he had exhibit they saw these signs.
You mean just
Real.
because, like, he's a psychopath, and so why would they let a psychopath on this project?
I don't know. I just thought some of the moments like when he pulls the earpiece out in the when he gets hurt and then he recovers, would they have really just thrown him back into the field after in the hunt? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There was one person I questioned a little bit. Not saying it was
Sure. Well.
unbelievable. I just was wondering,
Mm-hmm.
was this would this have really happened realistically?
Yeah, and maybe that's where if you buy the idea that Thaddeus Ross is so intent on finding the Incredible Hulk no matter what, then the idea that he would use whatever's possible, including this guy who should have died from fighting the Hulk but then survives, should he's going to use whatever he can to get there. And
I
so
guess
the
that's
idea
true.
that this guy can go one to one combat with him provides some justification for that. I think and maybe I just had some disconnect between what you were saying and what I should be understanding. But this idea that Thaddeus Ross is just totally intent on taking out the Incredible Hulk no matter what is something that I never really understood why, other than he just had this obsession that he had to do it, that he had to take care of the Hulk. And this was going to be his thing no matter what. Like his claim to fame almost, except for that no one really knows about the project except for him and a few other key people. So,
Well,
I don't
I
know.
saw it more as him trying to get his property back, where it's like he sees the Hulk, the idea of the Hulk as his property, as his weapon, and the fact
Hmm.
that it escaped him, it's unacceptable, and that he needs to get it. He needs to take it back from the person who stole it from him, which would be Bruce Banner. And he's
Hmm.
like he feels wronged by Bruce Banner at the same time because of how Bruce Banner reacted, and so the way I saw it is like he's trying to take back what is rightfully his, and he sees the Hulk as uncontrolled as this weapon that should not be out in the wild. It should be in the U.S. government's hands. So
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
it's a little bit of all that. So In my head, Thaddeus Ross made more sense to me than Bronsky did.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, Bronsky. I guess if you listed Bronsky, if Bronsky, if you, it depends on how much of a psycho Bronsky is. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
guess I believe it more if he's more of a psycho. Keep his character a little bit more. Because
Right.
if he's more psychotic, then it's like, okay, then you kind of have to write off some ideas of who he is as a character. So then he makes more sense in that way.
Sure.
So,
Well,
but
at the very least, he's a high functioning psychopath, which
yeah.
then makes it harder to tell that he's a psychopath because
Mm,
it's he's high functioning, right?
yeah.
But definitely I could see where why would anyone want to have a death wish where they want to get destroyed by this thing or survive it?
Mm,
Clearly they gave some indication of that where he says he wants to be in the fight all the time, right?
mm,
Which indicates that he has some level of psychopathy about him where he should have some higher ranking for the pure reason that he's had all of this experience and been so successful in all of these different circumstances. But
mm,
he doesn't have that because he wants to be on the front lines, and there's something crazy about that you would want to be there all the time. But yeah, I mean, I some of that feels like you have to read into the character a bit to be truly believable that he's a psychopath, just because you don't get all of the indicators with him that you do with, say, other psychotic characters, right? Whether it's
yeah.
the guy from No Country for Old Men or whether it's the Joker from the Batman series, right? There's multiple indicators and tells that tell you, even if they are more high functioning, like I can't remember the villain's character from No Country for Old Men, but he's
I think
clearly
it's
high
Anton
functioning.
Sugar.
Yeah, Sugar. He's clearly high functioning and can interact with society, but he's not okay. He's not a normal individual,
Mm,
and you get a
yeah.
lot of indicators of something like that, right? Versus in this film, he seems like a fully functioning individual until you get to the point where he's demanding the superhero serum from, or the Bruce Banner's blood serum, whatever, from Samuel Stearns, right? And then
Yeah.
you're going, wow, this guy truly is insane. Or when he, I guess, when he stands in front of the Hulk as well, you could argue that's the same thing. But you know,
Mm,
like for the most part, he's fairly fine. So yeah, I could see and I could buy the idea that he's not very compelling. I didn't fully understand Thaddeus either, as I mentioned before. So this was one of the areas that got a really serious ding from me. Is that I
okay.
just don't think that either of the opposing forces in this film are actually strong pushes against uh, Bruce Banner's character. Like, and some of it too is simply that Bruce Banner is invincible.
Mm,
But beyond that, it's like, why are they here? Why do they want the Hulk gone?
mm.
Isn't
Well, the
exactly compelling,
yeah,
in my
I
opinion.
think the problem with this movie is that we don't believe Thaddeus Ross can actually capture the Hulk. They don't give convincing reason that at any point in the movie that he actually can catch the Hulk and stop him. Because then actually, when he does eventually capture Bruce Banner, he's not as the Hulk, and as far as we know, he might not be able to. He may have just been cured of being the Hulk and might just be a normal guy now, Bruce
Uh huh.
Banner. So it's almost like the only time he was actually able to catch him is when he was human, which
Right.
so it's just one of those things as an audience. So it's like we don't actually believe that either Bronsky or Frost, that the general, can capture him when he's the Hulk. The only time where
Mm-hmm.
that's and even then it quickly jumps to Bronsky becoming the Abomination, and then we have
Right.
the finale fight. So
Right. Well, it's like, and you see that from the start where your baseline of what you expect from opening fights,
hmm,
scenes,
hmm,
all of that provides the bottom of the barrel, if you will. This is as easy as it should get. Everything else from here should get harder, hypothetically. If you're making the
yeah,
tension stronger, you're adding increased danger and concerns for the audience's perspective, it should only get worse from there. The baseline they provide for you is this guy, the Incredible Hulk, gets shot with like 20,000 tranquilizers and it does nothing, right?
hmm,
And you see them all bouncing off and him stepping over them like they mean nothing. And at that point, if you're watching that and saying, oh, that's compelling, I don't know. It's like, at that point, you go, okay, they have to have something way stronger than that to actually capture him.
hmm,
Turns out they don't. I mean, the one saving thing that some people might not like if you're actually a huge Incredible Hulk fan is the idea that they had these sound wave things that damaged him or caused harm and might have been able to stop him. It's
Mm,
not clear what they were even going to do with that. Would they just shoot him with sound waves for eternity until he falls asleep? I don't know. Like it was unclear what that was even supposed to do. But at least
mm,
that one seemed to make the idea that he can be hurt,
mm.
which I thought was interesting. Maybe an interesting take. That being said, if you're an Incredible Hulk person, you're probably losing your mind because you go, "There's no way that he would get hurt by sound waves. That's so stupid," you know. So I don't know. I didn't care. I thought it was interesting, but it also didn't really add a lot to the film other than to say, "Oh, he was temporarily disabled by sound waves for 2 seconds and then
Mm.
destroyed them anyways." Once again, an overpowered character, which makes it hard to make a compelling protagonist.
Yeah.
Going back to the creation of the character and the conflicting forces around them.
I mean, you could argue that the comment about things from the comics and such like that, but I think since we're just talking about this movie in general, I think this
Mm,
movie just failed on certain points to deliver on like the villains, the tension on certain points. Not completely on the villains, but I do think they could have done better. So
sure.
it is what it is. What is we're talking about? So this this movie.
No, and that's totally fair. Did you think in at least the creation of this character and the portrayal in this film that there was themes and messages they were trying to portray for the audiences that we can take away from this film?
Actually, I think there may have been, and that's because there's this whole idea of him fearing the monster. And at the end of the movie, there is a change in Bruce Banner where he's not as afraid of the monster because at the very end, the last thing we see of him is he's actively turning into the Hulk, like
Uh-huh.
intentionally. So, like, you definitely see that he overcomes his fear that has been driving him throughout this whole movie. Um, so you almost get this idea of uh, how fear of oneself doesn't help in a situation. Like, you don't see him progress as a character or like do anything of good or no until he actually embraces the parts of him that he's been trying to get rid of, I guess.
That's true.
So I
Okay.
guess you could say there is something of a theme of like don't reject every part of you because sometimes there's like I guess there's things we don't like about ourselves, so maybe that could be of benefit to society possibly. So there's almost like something that may be a gift in certain circumstances that we don't like maybe that could be like that there's something to be said like that could be the theme of this movie, and I kind of
Yeah.
saw that play out in the character of Bruce Banner. So I was like, okay, it's not very strong,
Yeah.
but I think it's there. So because there is a character change. So
Yeah, I guess that's true. I was thinking about that. He does change a little bit,
mhm,
and he does come to embrace the Incredible Hulk inside of him, which
mm,
is, I wonder. Well, I'm sure there's multiple reasons why they recast Edward Norton from being the Incredible Hulk to Mark Ruffalo, but
mm,
one of them could be that um, that the movie didn't do super well, so they were looking for a new face for it. The other thing too could be that the way that this film ends is very different from the struggle you see with the Incredible Hulk going forward, and so they maybe wanted to distance themselves from how this film was portraying the Incredible Hulk, just because um, it wasn't the direction they wanted to take him. So, because you see him continue to struggle with this creature inside of him in all future iterations of the Incredible Hulk that we've seen going forward, pretty much, with maybe the exception of the Incredible Hulk in the Thor Ragnarok film. But for the most part, I think that that's pretty much what you get. The Yeah, I think I'd go with that theme because I was really struggling for that about embracing your inner self, I guess.
mm,
I don't know. It wasn't strong. I would agree with you. It wasn't strong. And so even though they leave you with that opening scene in the same way they at the end of the film, right, where he's back with the meditation, except for now, instead of trying to resist this inner side of him that he doesn't like, he now embraces it and says it's so good. In this case, it's just not a strong message because I don't know, maybe the characters aren't believable, the tension isn't really built up, and so it's trite. There's any number of reasons with the problems we've already discussed in this film why the theme is not strong. But I
Mm.
would agree with you the theme is not strong.
I looked it up. So apparently, uh, Mark Ruffalo was the director's first choice for Bruce Banner, but the studio
Oh,
wanted a bigger name for the movie, so they chose Edward Norton. So,
hmm,
but I guess Edward Norton dropped
interesting.
out, so they Mark Ruffalo got cast in the Avengers and follow up
Huh,
everything following up.
that's interesting. Um, I mean, I like Edward Norton. I think he does a great King Baldwin the
Yeah.
Fourth, but it's he's a great actor, so I don't
Mm.
fault them for using
Oh yes,
him.
yes,
But
yeah.
it is interesting the creative decisions they make in regards to
Mm.
that. So, what do you think about the lasting impact of this film? Do you think this film had a lasting impact going into the future Marvel films, into our understanding of the Incredible Hulk today, or do you think he was largely forgotten after this film, or this
I think this
iteration of Bruce
movie
Banner?
I think this movie in particular kind of got left by the wayside. It's definitely one of those movies people don't talk about super much, at least not for a while. It's just,
Hmm.
I mean, the reality is, I think it was the only real like flop of the first phase of the MCU, so everyone kind of left it behind. They kind of forgot about it. Um, with that being said, it's not the worst movie Marvel Studios has made. They've
Yep.
definitely this ranks up there as way better than a lot of stuff they've made.
Hmm.
Uh, I also feel like there has been attempts recently, obviously it's Brave New World specifically, where they've been trying to come back to this movie because they brought Samuel
Hmm.
Stearns back, they brought Betty
Right.
Ross back,
Hmm.
and they've like capsized, like talked about some of these little moments, like just some of these things from this movie were brought back to the forefront because they were like forgotten in the background. They're like, okay, let's bring these
Hmm.
back.
Hmm.
So I think it hasn't been completely forgotten, but it's definitely one of those like almost obscure Marvel films that's almost been lost to time. So per se.
Yeah, it's definitely been lost to time. It's really interesting that they have kind of forgotten it for a large part until recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it speaks to the value that this film brought. It didn't bring a lot other than bringing the Green Man to the screen, right? And
Mm.
so we might see the Green Beans giant, friendly giant guy on screen is cool. At the end of the day, his character is inherently harder to make compelling,
Mm.
and they didn't necessarily do that super well. So
Mm.
that's what you got. We might see a future thing in the next Superman film, which actually comes out very soon this weekend. So we'll be reviewing that for sure. But for in regards to a invincible character, right? They've had several iterations of Superman versus iterations of the Incredible Hulk seems to be a side character for a lot of the films that we've seen, which
Mm.
somewhat makes sense, right? Because he's a tool for the Avengers or a tool for Thor in his films to create conflict or create a powerful tank, if you will, on the side of the good guys, right? So it's not like he has a lot going for him in regards to story wise that you can build very easily, right? You have to really develop him well and do some unique things with him if you want him to be his own unique standalone character for his own film. And that's just not what you got for this one. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.